Welcome to the Forging Honor podcast. I'm Jonathan George.
And I'm Benjamin Jones. Here at The Forge, we explore what it means to live as Christian men. Along the way, we'll be doing challenges, building habits and character through action.
On today's episode, Banjo and I get to talk about random stuff, the things that we want to talk about. They're not related to any challenge. It's not related to anything in particular that's going on right now. It's our Forging Honor After Hours, as we call it. This is our first episode of this format, so let us know what you think. We'll talk a little bit about some of the books that we've been reading, what we've been learning from those. We get into a little bit of the relationship that we've had to our action and our habits over the last year and a half now. It's been that long on the show. And then we wrap up with some recommendations for podcasts, other podcasts that we've really enjoyed recently. So I hope that you enjoy this show.
Welcome to Forging Honor After Hours, a more relaxed and conversational space between friends. It's the pub of the Forging Honors of offshoot, shall we say. It's a more relaxed time. We're here, grab a beer, grab a pipe. Let's unwind and have some fun. JJ, welcome to the pub, to the Forging Honor After Hours experience, a little experiment for ourselves.
You'll definitely hear some more you'll hear I have a glass of whiskey. You might inadvertently hear some glass, or I'm about to light a pipe here, so you're gonna hear some matches. Let's see.
There it is. This is really the Forging Honors ASMR experience. In a minute, you'll hear the sounds of the anvil and the clanging of tongs as we iron sharpens iron. We really wanted to bring that full thematic, cinematic almost experience, full audio experience. I'm just vamping right now while JJ is doing his pipe.
I got to get my pipe started.
If we're lucky, Elliot will cut that, and we're just gonna get a nice and tight. Just only the good parts.
Solid intro. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
this is the dangerous thing here, JJ. Is like we're
with no topic. We're kind of
we have some topics.
We but we don't have our normal challenge. So the after hours is less about whatever the normal Forging Honor challenges are, and it's an opportunity for us to explore some other things we've been talking about, ideas we've had, or just fun stuff to chat about. So we're going to start there with the fun stuff to chat about, and start with Banjo. What have you been reading, watching? What kind of stuff are you consuming right now that is filling your time, and what are you enjoying out of that?
Yeah, I'm okay. So I gotta pause there. I slipped into podcast voice, and I slipped into like Forging Honor, like we're doing the challenge check-in voice, and I'm going to try and avoid that as much as possible because this is more relaxed and fun. But to answer your question, JJ, things I'm reading right now, have been reading for a while because it's a long book. Herman Bavinck's The Wonderful Works of God, which is kind of his systematic theology for lay people, which has been really refreshing. And I highly recommend that to anybody who wants to give it a read. The thing I really love about it right now is that not only does he do a really great job of kind of explaining really complex theological topics, but he really tells you like why it matters and why it's joyful news. So, for example, I had never really thought about like why it's good news and why it's worth rejoicing about that we have a Trinitarian God. Like I knew that was a fact. I knew that was what was scriptural. But I didn't find anything particularly joyful about that. But Bavinck does this amazing job of not just showing you this is what's true, this is why scripture shows that it's true, but he also does an amazing job of just saying, and this is amazing. Like this is great news that we have a Trinitarian God. So that's been good. I just finished the book, The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which is a really powerful book about the Vietnam War, really powerful novel, kind of a novel / memoir about his experience in Vietnam. That's been really interesting. It's pushing me to kind of study the Vietnam War a little bit more. And lastly, I was given a book that's been really fascinating and tugging at my brain the last couple of days, which is a book called, I have it right here. It's called Understanding Comics, Understanding the Invisible Art of Comics by Scott McCloud. and it's really good. It's a comic book that explains the medium of comic books. So how does a comic book work? Uh,
That sounds pretty meta. Comic book
it's
about comic books. That's fun.
Yes, it's extremely meta, and it's really pretty brilliant. There aren't many comics. Comics as a genre is a really understudied form. People don't spend a lot of time thinking about nobody thinks of comics as like high art, and so there's kind of a gap. Not a lot of people have kind of explored like how does it work, the same way that we have with like books and movies and theater and that kind of a thing. So there's a rich field of study there, and this is one of only maybe one or two books in the field that exist on the art as such. So it's given me a lot to think about as a writer. I wish I was artistic. I wish I could do comic books. I'd be curious, JJ, what your experience with comic books was. If that was something you've spent much time reading.
Not really. I did have one. It was like more of a graphic novel than I guess a graphic novel is a comic book.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's kind of the acceptable form of comic
right,
books.
right. But I read it a lot when I was, I don't know, 10 or 11. It was a graphic novel of the story of Iwo Jima and the battle that
Interesting.
happened there.
Yeah.
That actually had a pretty big impact on me just because, it's a graphic novel of men in battle.
Yeah.
And in the Pacific Theater. And it's a fascinating story. It's one of the reasons I actually know that battle halfway decently.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet that's really fascinating. Did you read Tintin or anything like that?
I did read Tintin. So that was my next thing. Was I read a lot of Tintin, and had the whole collection. At one point, it's probably at my parents' house still. But I really liked Tintin. But I think aside from those two things, I can't think if there have been other. We had like a Pilgrim's Progress graphic novel.
Yeah.
I didn't read that very much. That's pretty much my experience with comics or comic books.
I had a few comic books growing up, and then they kind of disappeared from the house for various reasons. But in college, I was like, I didn't read comic books. I want to read comic books, and I kind of had this moment of like, well, there's nothing stopping me from reading the comic books. And so I bought a whole bunch of Spider-Man comics and got really into Spider-Man. Still very much into Spider-Man, and I gotta say, some of the stories in the world of Spider-Man have had like a huge impact on me, even in the last like year and a half, 2 years. I think they're great. But it's been really interesting to read this book about the medium of comic books and to kind of figure out, okay, why do these frames, why do these panels work the way that they do? What is your mind doing when it reads a comic book? It's pretty fascinating. And it's a pretty rich field. I would be really interested to see, just people work in comics and in graphic novels over the next 10, 15 years and to see people kind of grow in that and the art form develop. But anyway, that's the very meta book that I'm reading. JJ, are there any books that you're working through?
Yes. So you kind of hit like a theological, a history, and then a more informative, not fiction, but informative. As far as theological works I've read, I'm working through this book, and we are recording some video on this, and we might publish it at some point. So if anyone watches that video, you can see I'm holding up the book Timothy, Titus, and You. It's by George C. I don't know how you say his last name. Scipione.
Wait,
anyway.
Is it Scipione? Yeah. Oh, Scipione.
Okay, so
yeah.
you know this author anyway.
He came and preached at my church many times. It had a huge impact on me.
That's cool. Yes, I'm really enjoying this book. It's a book written actually for elders in the church, which I'm not an elder in the church, but it was given to me as part of some training we're doing at church. And obviously tailored towards my group rather than elders. But there's a lot of excellent questions in here that some are really tough to grapple with, and some are pretty straightforward. So just like the first chapter is on your calling. Who are you is the first question. It's like, all right, well, let's just jump right into some tough stuff. What is your calling in life? It's a little bit easier. Do you know your calling as Paul knew his?
Oh, that's tough.
I don't know. I didn't have an angel show up on the road to Damascus and tell me what my calling was. So that's a tough one.
Right.
But then, it gets into it with things like about protection of the flock. How do you command? Do you command from Scripture?
Yeah.
Do you teach from Scripture? And then there's chapters. There's a chapter on prayer. digs into the urgency of prayer, the types of prayer. A chapter on your relationship to women. That's been interesting. Has a whole section on your relationship with your wife and how that is growing. It doesn't pull punches either. And it's mostly just questions. And the end of the chapter will have a few, I don't know if it's like action items or kind of plan things. Like in the relationship to women section, it addresses sexual lust and has like, here's an action plan. Pray for forgiveness immediately and briefly. Second, pray for a woman or a girl. If she is modest, ask for her protection. If she is immodest in behavior or dress, ask for the Holy Spirit to convict her and protect righteous men from her. Third, immediately get involved in what you should be doing to please your God. Fourth, have your wife pray for this problem. So very just do these things. These will help you. It's very thoughtful. Lots of great questions, things about your office, if you're a member in the church or an elder or a deacon, the challenges, the management of your household, just great stuff. Really enjoying it. I've been digging into that. I can't show it here because this is an audiobook form, but I've been listening to Bonson's Pushing the Antithesis, a book on, I'm doing that for another study I'm in. And that's about apologetics, right? How to do apologetics from a presuppositional approach. So that's been really good. There's a slew of other books that are kind of coming down the line with both of these studies. So lots of other stuff I'll get to mention at a future date. In terms of other things I'm reading, I just finished today, actually. So which means I don't know if I have it in here. Oh, I do. Leap Hike Ridge by N.D. Wilson.
I think I've read that one.
Yeah, it's one I've actually returned to several times. It's fun, super short, easy to read. I read it in a couple hours in a couple afternoons.
I did not find that book easy to read. If that's the one that I'm thinking of, that one.
What was the one you're thinking of?
I think it's that one. Is that, remind me of the plot?
It's the one where the boy.
No spoilers.
It's the one. So you know this in the first two chapters. The boy gets swept down a creek under the mountain.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I did not understand that book at all. I have a hard time. N.D. Wilson is the one who wrote like the 100 Cupboards, right?
Yes, that's correct.
I have never understood any book he's written.
Really?
Maybe I was too young, but every time I've read an N.D. Wilson book, I've walked away going, I have no idea what just happened in that thing. That didn't make any sense.
He does, especially some of like Leap Hike Ridge is one of his earlier ones, and he does favor plots that are pretty simple, yet he surrounds them with language that can be not flowery, but poetical to the point of distracting from the plot.
Yeah.
So I do notice that, like 100 Cupboards, that definitely happens, especially in the third book. There are scenes where just you have no idea what's actually happening because of the language he's using.
Yeah, I think it was also
get into
like
the flow of it.
There's like a perspective issue. Like I think I can't remember. It's been a long time. So
yeah, maybe.
But I think I think he plays with perspectives in a way that I found really baffling. I don't know. But you've returned to this one several times. Why do you return to it?
I think the adventure of it. Like
Okay.
it's about I think he's 11 or 12. He's 11. The boy. And I read it about that age. So it just captured me because he has this whole adventure being swept under the mountain, and there's a guy down there that's been trapped for years, and there's ancient artifacts and cool things. Like it's just, there's a whole adventure aspect to it that I really love. And I liked that about N.D. Wilson's other works, The 100 Cupboards, as well as, what's the other one? It's about, I can't remember the name of the series, about a boy that becomes part of like the secret society, the Order of Brendan, which is all about like history and ancient artifacts and like the power they actually have.
Yeah.
So I really got captured by it. As I've gotten older, I think, I'm not a writer, so I'm in no position to really critique his writing. But I can understand. I do read a lot, and I have written some short stories that you've read, and I guess
Quite enjoyable.
I do consider myself to be a bit of a poet. So there are aspects where I could critique it, and I think it mostly comes down to, I really like his stories. I know he probably has an editor, but he could probably use a little more than an editor and some of how he approaches some of that stuff.
Could be. I mean, my caveat with all these things has always been, look, this person has done something that I have not done, which is write a published book that has
exactly
a wide audience.
Can't critique it too much. Man, I am struggling with my pipe here. I've lit it like 3 times, but I'm talking too much, Banjo.
Well,
Uh,
that's the trick with the pipe. You got to find that right
yep.
balance of listening well and
And
smoking
actually,
well, I guess.
yeah, well, and that goes back to our last episode. I did say I had a rule about I smoke a cigar when I'm having a conversation. So maybe I
It's
should
a
switch over.
that would be easier for you.
We're gonna try one more time with the pipe, and then maybe we'll switch.
You just have to ask me a really good question so that I can talk and you can keep the pipe going. That's what's missing here. We need a really good question, a real stumper.
A real stumper.
I was
Oh,
gonna. Well, I was.
that's a
I have a
stumper. I got to
question.
come up with a stumper. Yeah, ask
I,
away, Banjo.
I was going to ask when it comes to fiction, what's your level of I need like do you favor a certain amount of realism in your fiction? Do you want fantasy? Do you what like why do you read a book? Why do you read fiction?
Fiction.
Yeah. I'll stick with fiction because you're a very practical guy. I know why you read a book that's like non-practical.
Right,
But
right. You're getting something directly from a non-practical book, or maybe you're reading a biography or a history,
yeah.
and you're
But
learning directly.
fiction
Yes,
is
fiction's more of an escape, right? You're not necessarily getting action items out of it, right? It's not here's a book about tech to draw information from. I think fiction for me, I've always read fiction. I remember we listened to audiobooks before I could read. My mother always was reading to us. You know, she read all, Narnia series, Little House on the Prairie, Anne of Green Gables, a bunch of stuff to us.
yeah,
So I've always liked fiction and just storytelling in general. I think you and I are similar in that way.
very.
And my favorite work of fiction, really mythology, is Lord of the Rings. Um, and I'm not unique in that at all. But I just love. I think it's the crafting of a world, the feeling of entering into a world that's not our own, even if it's set in our world. Anne of Green Gables is a world other than mine. It's set in a different
Right.
time. There's stuff happening that exists there that I'm not used to. So it's exploring a different world, which is why I think I've not enjoyed as much modern fiction because it's often set in settings that are common to me or are known to me in a way that like there's less to explore there. There's less to imagine.
What's a modern book that you've read where you felt that where you're like, I know this one already.
Let's see. I've struggled getting into Flannery O'Connor, I think.
Really?
I don't maybe that is also the way she writes.
I could see. Well, here's the thing. I could see why if the primary objective in fiction for you is escape, which is a totally that's a totally legitimate primary objective for fiction. But if that's your primary objective, Flannery O'Connor is not going to be
Right.
a pleasant escape, like because that's not her purpose when writing
Exactly.
a story. She's her fiction is really the opposite of escapism. It's to wake you up.
Yep.
It's to say, she says famously, for people who can read, you write with small figures, but for people who cannot read, you write in images startling and frightening, startling and large. And so all of her characters, all of her stories have this like huge and frightening element to them, which is not going to be appealing to someone who's like, well, I'm just sitting down because I want to be in a different world, which is totally fine. So
That's an
I couldn't
excellent
understand
point.
that.
And then there have been other more recent authors that were intended to be, young adult fiction. Some that my brother has handed to me that I just didn't enjoy as much. And a lot of that might have to do with the authorship. And I will say, like for me, even though it is a bit of an escape, I'm not an escapist.
Sure.
Tolkien was accused of writing escapist literature, and he fired back with, of course, you need some kind of escape, right? He was writing during World War II or right after World War II. He's like, the world is brutal, but that escape needs to allow the reader to come back refreshed and ready to face the world.
And he's writing too out of his experience with
Right.
World War I. So
Exactly.
that's pretty interesting.
So he totally he doesn't want to be seen as an escapist, but he understands that fiction has to exist for a reason.
Yeah.
At any rate, that's kind of, you can get into the nitty gritty of why books in general there. But I definitely like the adventure of a story. That's one of the reasons I like Lord of the Rings, and especially the Silmarillion. It's just this world is laid out, and it's such a fascinating world to explore. I love a book that comes with a map.
That's a good. I love a book that comes with a map. That's yeah. That's definitely a particular kind of book.
Right. And growing up as when I was 7 or 8, I read a ton of the Redwall series, and they all have maps.
Those are great. Yeah.
Right. And those are fun. Like, they're not, I would never call them the most well-written piece of literature.
The great thing about Redwall is when you've read about 3 of them, you've read all of them.
Exactly.
Because they all follow all of the same formula.
Yep.
But you have to read all of them because there's always different food in each one.
All the food and the different characters. Is so good. There's genealogies. There's all the relationships. It's a ton of fun. The different factions of animals, and I love it. I haven't read one of those in a long time.
The hares are so funny.
I like the hares. I like the shrews. I always thought they were fun.
If it weren't for the hares of Redwall, I never would have appreciated P.G. Wodehouse.
Interesting. Okay, tell me about that.
So you've read P.G. Wodehouse, right?
A little bit. I've read some of the Jeeves stuff. Okay. I haven't read anything that wasn't Jeeves.
So for folks who are listening who may not know, P.G. Wodehouse is one of the funniest British authors of all time. Like if you're gonna like put together a list of funny British guys, it's gonna be like Shakespeare, Dickens, Wodehouse, pretty much in that order. And Wodehouse wrote an unbelievable amount of novels, just like short 200 word or 200 page novels that are riotously funny. I mean, just so like there have been times where I'm reading a Wodehouse book and I have to like shut it and laugh and get it out of my system before I pick it back up again. It's just so good.
Incredible stuff. The audiobooks are great for that too.
Amazing.
Also, if you find one with a great reader, I've been known for saying I don't listen to audiobooks.
Yeah.
Wodehouse is an exception.
Oh,
I can listen to any of the Jeeves audiobooks. I love that stuff.
It's incredible. Also, I think the BBC did a production with Hugh Laurie playing Bertram Wooster and Stephen Fry playing Jeeves.
What a series.
So
phenomenal
good.
Stuff. I love that stuff.
So good. But again, the books are better because the narration is just key to what's funny about it. Anyway.
Which I do think Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry pull a lot of that through in a great way.
So good. I'm not decrying them at all, but just P.G. Wodehouse is amazing.
Yes.
Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry are comedic geniuses, but so is Wodehouse. Anyway, they're very, very funny, very worth looking at. Also, very interesting look at masculinity that we could get into at some point, but we won't. Anyway, the hares in Redwall have that kind of foppish, kind of goofy, like sense of humor, that like upper crust British. Very dry wit, very like run right by, blink and you'll miss it sense of humor, and that characterizes Wodehouse, that characterizes Wooster in particular. Like
I think they're meant to represent like some of the British upper nobility that entered the cavalry.
Yeah,
and that's who they are inspired by, and it is phenomenally incredible stuff.
Yeah, and the character that Wooster is in Wodehouse is very much like the mockery of those guys, and so it's kind of like it's kind of, I saw the good version of it in Redwall first, like the noble version, and then got that kind of expectation because I read Redwall very young, and then got it kind of subverted when I was a little bit older with Wodehouse and with Wooster. Blanding's Castle is very, very good. If you haven't picked up those yet, there's no Jeeves, there's no Wooster in them, but I think it is like a related family. Anyway, they're very funny. They're very good. There's a lord who spends all of his time worrying about his prize pig, and whether or not the pig is okay. That's like the whole thing. It's very good. Check it out.
Excellent. Yeah, I've got a whole stack. You can probably see back there that I'm endeavoring to get through. But we'll get there. There's always more to read than I have time for. And I've been trying to kind of reignite. One of the reasons I picked up Lee Pike Ridge again was I knew it's something I could get through without too much issue. And I've been trying to reignite my love of reading, partially based out of some of the conversations we've had recently. especially surrounding ritual. And then we're considering doing, spoilers, a technology challenge coming up. And I've realized I haven't had my love of reading in a while, not since, really probably since like sophomore year of college.
Yeah.
Have I sat down? I've read a few books that I wanted to read, but very few. And I've been trying to get back into it. I did pick up the audiobook that Andy Serkis narrated, The Hobbit.
Oh, that's great.
He did a phenomenal job. If you have Spotify Premium, it's free with Spotify Premium. And Andy Serkis, as you know, he's just incredible with his voices, incredible with his reading. I loved it. I had a ton of fun. At any rate.
I just taught The Hobbit. Well, not just taught, but a few months ago, I taught The Hobbit for one of my literature classes, and that was really rewarding to my 8th graders. And it's so good. My favorite of the Lord of the Rings stories right now is Children of Hurin, which is like the most tragic.
That is such a different kind of story too. Like
It's
if you were
so-
to pick up The Hobbit and then go straight to Children of Hurin, you would be
Shell shocked.
so thrown off. I do love that story though. It's actually,
basically Tolkien's like tragic, like Greek tragedy
Yes.
in his world. It's very good.
It is actually, and it's based off of the same story that Hamlet was based off of.
Yeah.
Which is Swedish or Finnish story, Clervo.
Have you seen the movie The Northman?
No.
Oh,
I've heard. My cousin mentioned it to me actually not too long ago.
I saw that in theaters when it came out. It's got some very weird moments, but it's really good. I really like that one. But anyway,
it's also a similar type of story, or similar?
It's also based on the Hamlet story. It's
Okay.
kind of much more like stripped down.
Right.
And Robert Eggers, the director, it has just like amazing shots of like Vikings killing each other. It's beautiful.
You gotta love it. Gotta love it.
Anyway, so you're reading The Hobbit. You're listening to the Andy Serkis.
Yes. So I finished that end of last month. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, on the whole, I've been just trying to get back into some of this stuff. So, where you're always saying, "Oh, I've been reading this," I'm going, "Oh, I should get back into that." So, thank you, Banjo, for helping inspire me and back into the world of reading.
Hey, happy to help. Has reading up to this point been kind of more utilitarian? It's like I'm going to read something because it's got like a something I can learn from it, or has that kind of reading fallen off too?
That reading has fallen off too. It was very utilitarian in college.
Yeah,
and then it's been very utilitarian for my work, reading a lot of very technical material or watching very technical YouTube videos.
Right.
Surrounding the type of work I do, which, I do a lot of software. So it gets very technical, right? There's not much humor there. There's not much to get into. It's just, you're doing it because you want to learn something about code. Which is a fine thing. There's a time and a place for it. But I kind of got into a place of I didn't enjoy it. So I needed to pick up some things I enjoyed. At any rate, shifting the conversation, we had a few things we wanted to talk about today. And one thing I wanted to get into was, we're doing Forging Honor. It's all about forming habits, these challenges we do. And you and I being kind of the guinea pigs in these challenges. I've had a ton of fun with it. But there's kind of an ongoing conversation there about the relationship of faith and works, or the advice and action. And so I would love to get into a little bit of what are your thoughts on the direction that our action has taken. Are you seeing a noticeable shift in your habits over the last year and a half now that we've been doing this? Are you thinking about it more? How is that affecting your day to day? And while you think about that and respond to that, I'm going to grab that cigar.
Good thinking. As long as you can still hear me, because if you can't hear me, then that's a useless part of the conversation, I suppose. No, it's a good question. Now I got to formulate my thoughts. I'll start here. I certainly have enjoyed the last year and a half, and it's been a lot of fun for me as well. And I hope it's been fun for our listeners as well. I hope they've enjoyed it too, and I hope they're getting something out of it as well. But for me, I think it's definitely been helpful for me. I mean, you're talking about how like the last couple of weeks or a couple of months or whatever, you're looking at getting back into those kind of almost poetical things, right? You want to read a little bit more. You want to find the joy in some of those things. And I think one of the areas that's been really helpful to me is coming in the opposite direction, where my tendency is very, um, I would say intellectual, but abstract. I'm a very abstract person, and I tend to I really care about the abstract because I think abstractions really matter. Like when I'm reading about this comic book, this book about comic books, that matters to me because I think the way that a medium is presented has consequences, and I think those consequences are worth thinking about. And I don't. And so anyway, um, but I spend so much time in the abstract that I often stray away from the prosaic or the necessary, or like let's go get this thing done, you know. And I think our time in the forge has been really helpful to me in that it's forced me into some really practical, really concrete challenges, and some things that are really necessary. So for example, uh, Bible reading, like the Bible reading habit, I've become much more aware of as we've talked about it. Um, and that's always a thing I've struggled with. I've always had a hard time like setting aside time for Bible reading and saying, okay, this is when I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to do it. And I've always cognitively known that it's important, but I've never like acted it out. And the 6 weeks, especially this last time, the 6 weeks that we spent practicing that was really helpful for me because it really forced me into like, all right, you're going to do it and you're going to have to talk about it, and that really kept me going. And it's continued. I've continued to read it. I've had, it's interesting. Even the last couple of weeks since my school has ended, which means I'm on summer vacation, which means my routines are off. Because I'm not going into work. I'm not waking up as early as I normally do. I've taken a couple of trips to some different places. And I've noticed how that's affected my habits. I've spent less time reading my Bible because time has become a little bit more jumbled. I'm not as settled in my ways. But I'm back home now after some trips. And so I'm already thinking about how do I get back on track, which is cool for me. Because instead of being like, well, I would like to form this habit, it's more like I would like to be on track. I would like to get back to where I was, and that's a nice shift for me. Also, because I felt the last couple of weeks like, oh, there's some consequences to my actions when I'm not following through with my Bible reading. Like I am aware of differences there.
What kind of differences?
Mostly it's a from where does my help come? On days where I don't read my Bible, I tend to be more up by my bootstraps. I'm going to do this by myself, kind of a thing. And on the days where I read my Bible, I'm much more aware of like, I can't do this. On days where I read my Bible, I tend to think I'm a pretty good person. On days where on days where I don't read my Bible, there we go. On days where I don't read my Bible, I tend to think I'm a pretty good person. On days where I read my Bible, I think I really need Jesus.
That's healthy. I mean, and it's good to recognize that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's been good, especially because after like 2 or 3 days of like, I haven't read my Bible, it's like, I can almost feel the arrogance in my body turn up like a thermometer. Like I can kind of, I feel the heat rising a little bit. Maybe that's just because it's like 93 degrees where I am right now. But I can't help but feel that it's more having to do with scripture than it is with the atmosphere. So anyway, that's one thing that I've been thinking about. It's just I'm forced into more practical applications of my faith, if that makes sense. You've got your cigar. How are you feeling a year and a half in as we're talking through some of these things?
I've really enjoyed it. It's also been an opportunity to a lot of self-reflection has happened, which is, I think, healthy for young men our age.
Would you describe yourself as an introspective person?
Maybe. I definitely spend a significant amount of time wrestling through the path I'm on and the trajectory I'm taking. I don't know how much of that recently has been because of Forging Honor and how much of that is because of sermons I've been listening to, podcasts I've been picking up.
The particular time in your life that you're at.
That's fair. Yes, I've had a lot of change in the last 3 years. I guess I've been married for 4 now, but in that 4 years, getting married, getting a job, buying a house, having 2 kids, a lot has happened. And wherever there's significant change, there has to be significant reflection, is what I'm realizing. Because if I were just to do all this and not think about it, not consider the direction that this is taking me, I think it would be easy to wake up at some point after the kids have moved out and gone, what have I done with my life?
Right.
What did I ever consider how I was raising my children, whether or not I was raising them in the Lord? Did I ever consider how that was impacting my wife? How that was impacting me as a hopefully faithful steward of what God has given me? So there's a lot there to think about, and I think I have become more introspective in some ways. We did a challenge in our first go around of Forging Honor when we were doing the 2-week challenges. We did a challenge having to do with some of what Marcus Aurelius did with like journaling through
Right.
His thoughts and asking questions of himself. And that was good for me. It got me on a good path as far as more regularly digging into myself. Another thing I've done, we're not sponsored by this company, but a company I recommend if you want a kind of a practical help in that is this. It's called Rotor Runner, ROTE Runner. And they put out a planner. They have one in a larger size and one in a smaller size. And they have some quality notebooks as well. But the planner they have, it's a 6-month undated planner. And part of the planner is at the beginning, you write out all your roles and goals over the next 6 months.
Roles and goals.
Roles and goals. So what roles do you have in your life? As maybe father is one of them. For me, software consultant is one of them. Maybe host of Forging Honor. Member of my church. And then what are the goals with each of those? What are the goals associated with those over the next 6 months? And that, I'm on my 3rd one of these now. And that has been one of the most helpful reflections every 6 months to go through. Okay, what are my current roles? Did I fulfill my goals over the last 6 months? What am I going to do for the next 6 months? And putting all that into the broader perspective as a Christian of, am I glorifying God in all of this? Am I seeking God's glory rather than my own?
Right.
Now I can't say, I don't think I have the wisdom or the age, frankly, to say whether or not I've actually done that incredibly well. But you have to start somewhere, right? And that's kind of what I'm hoping to do with our habits and challenges that we're working through.
How has that? And is there any place where you can point to where you're like, I have grown here, like this sanctification has been at work in my life in this way. The Holy Spirit has been working in me in this way, maybe either with a habit or maybe something that we haven't done. Any of those things.
I think something I've mentioned it once before on the show. Something we haven't explicitly talked about as a habit or a challenge is family worship.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something I think if you were to look at my life a year ago, it was something I was not regularly leading my family in.
Yeah.
Now it is. And for me, that is a massive improvement.
Did that change with kids? Has that been a big part of that, or was that
a little bit? It's different when it's just you and your wife. Yeah. Family worship is a little like it's a less of a group activity. And now that my son is old enough to start to participate, start to try and repeat things like the Lord's Prayer or sing the doxology, that is encouraging for me as a father to be able to pass that on. But also, I think a lot of it is getting more invested in my church and my church life, and seeing, okay, other fathers that are 15, 20 years ahead of me on this journey of fatherhood, the ones that I respect and look up to, they are doing this regularly. When I'm in their home, they're doing this. So, and one in particular who I look up to a lot has directly encouraged me in that, and directly asked me, are you leading your family in these things? Are you teaching your wife and your children the truths of Scripture?
Yeah.
Or are you simply expecting that because you go to a decent church, they're going to pick it up somehow?
Right.
And that's been a good challenge for me, and that's been a broader challenge in a lot of ways. And I think that even though, we might be talking about a particular habit, like get up at the same time every day or something, there's questions of, why do I get up at the time I get up? Why does that matter? One of the reasons is so I have time to do family worship after breakfast, so I don't have to rush to work, right?
Right.
So even though the challenge on its own could be taken in isolation as like, this is just some practical thing we're doing, they've had a significant effect on me in that way. So have you experienced that with anything?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, I think one thing that's been helpful for me as I look back over the challenges is just realizing like I have agency in my time. I think a huge revelation for me in some ways, if I can use that word, not obviously special revelation, just an epiphany, if we can use that word, was like, oh, 15 minutes matters. That's been a big one for me. Like if I set aside 15 minutes to work on a thing I care about, then I'm gonna make progress. Dr. Sheehan in Running and Being talks about this. He says like, if find your play, find the thing that is play for you, that is a valuable activity that you find yourself in, that you can get into that flow state in, that you love doing. And once you find that thing, you tend to build your life around it, your day around it. And I think there's some presets for Christians that should be like spending time with God. That can look different ways, but that should in some way be a preset into your day, I think. But also there's like creative acts, for me at least, is hugely important. Like if I don't spend some time writing in a day, I feel like I lost a day. If I don't feel like I spent some time building in that way, or at least thinking about it, then I feel like I lost a day in some ways. That probably speaks to some of the inner anxieties in my own soul more than like the human condition. But just recognizing that like there's things I want to accomplish in life. How do I get there? By setting aside time every day to doing them. And I can wish them all I want, but if I don't take some action, we're not getting anywhere.
Right. And it doesn't have to be this grand thing. Like today, on this day, I'm going to write the great American novel.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's something for me where I will often think, oh, I don't have the time to do this. I only have 15 minutes. Therefore, I can't write that next line of code.
Yeah.
Therefore, I can't read for a little bit. Therefore, I can't really play with my son because in 15 minutes I have a meeting, or in 15 minutes I need to be out the door to get to work, whatever it is. And that goes a little bit to that idea we've talked about of stealing the minutes.
Right.
Which is something I have found hugely helpful. And just thinking about, oh, I have 5 minutes. That means I get to read a paragraph.
Right.
That means I get to glance through my calendar and write out my next goals. And pick whatever you want to fill in for that 5 minutes. I definitely have seen a marked improvement in my day-to-day because of that. So at any rate, and that goes to, I think as well, thinking through, or kind of a conversation we've had back and forth a little bit, is what does it mean to actually get things done? What does it mean to actually be productive? Is it simply checking the box for I did my Forging Honor challenge today? Or is it rather entering into that challenge and focusing on it wholeheartedly, such that you get deep into it? And I
And
think I have my answer for that, but
well, how do you differentiate between those two? I think that gets to
right. Well, we had a
motivation.
conversation with remember when we were talking with Jamie and Christian about our Bible reading?
Right. Yeah.
Like, is it worth it just to check the box?
Yeah. I
Was a
was
question we
surprised
had.
by some of the answers we got
Right.
in that question.
Well,
That
and
there
and
was, and folks should go check those episodes out because there's some
yes,
really, really good conversations.
and the answers, of kind of yes and no. Like, it is better to simply check the box than not.
Right.
Was impactful for me because I was kind of telling myself the lie a little bit of, if I don't truly get something out of it, or I'm not truly entering in, then it's not even worth doing.
Right.
Which had led to a significant chunk of time because the devil decides he's going to target me on that, of me saying, oh, I don't feel like doing my Bible reading today because I'm not going to be able to focus on it fully.
Right.
Rather than, okay, I have the time. I'm going to at least check this box, if nothing else.
And that mindset, which I fall into all the time, is it also doesn't give enough credit to the Holy Spirit of like, well, the Lord can use these 5 minutes, that this is going to be, that God doesn't need an hour, he's not limited in that way, so.
Right.
But it's easy for us to fall into that because we're so bound by time.
Absolutely. And on top of that, I think there's a sense because we forget that God is not bound that way. We start to constrain our faith or our work or our interactions with our family by the thought of, kind of back to what I was just saying, of, if I'm not able to enter in, then what's the point? The problem is, how often are we able to truly enter in? Like, we have to foster that. That has to be practiced. We have to tell ourselves, I'm entering in for this 5 minutes. And if that's all I get, you have a finger up.
I gotta figure
about
out
to,
what do you mean by enter in? Like what's your
what
define your
we were
terms a little
talking
bit.
about with the ritual challenge of like monotasking this.
Oh, okay.
And I think
Wholehearted.
and it comes down to a little bit of the difference between, am I doing it because it simply has to be done? In which case, why not multitask it?
Right.
Am I doing it because I love to do it? In which case, why would I bother doing some of these things? Or am I doing it because I know that it's valuable, and I also know that I should focus on it exclusively, even if for just 5 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of the blend and the balance here, right? Because there's so many things I have to do that I don't love doing, that I would never do them, even if I only had 5 minutes. And there's so many things that I feel deserve more time, that I'm not going to do them just because I only have 5 minutes. But that's the wrong perspective, right? The question I should be asking is, how can I best use this time and focus on it wholeheartedly? I don't know. We're kind of getting into it. I'm getting a little.
That's a little meta.
A little squirrely there as far as the answer.
Well,
so I don't know.
think,
could you help me sort that out?
Yeah, maybe to like, as I'm listening to what you're describing, there's a flutter of anxiety in my stomach of sorts, of how could I possibly do that? Like, in other words, like, long pause as I collect my thoughts. We're a whole beer in at this point, so we're good.
I have some catching up to do.
Anyway, there's a flutter of anxiety in my stomach of, I don't have the presence of mind to be present all of the time. Do you know what I mean? And so even for 5 minutes, I don't have the presence of mind to do that. Like I'm as you're talking, I'm thinking about my finitude. I'm thinking about my limited possibility. Part of this is just, we live in an age where our attention has been stolen. Like our ability to think clearly and in a focused way on a topic for more than 30 seconds is like next to none, you know? So I'm aware of like my own inability to do that. And is my, how dependent is my spiritual life on that, I suppose, is one way of putting it. Like, what hope is there for the modern tech-addled mind who's not able to think about something for more than 30 seconds if to read more than 3 verses takes more than 30 seconds? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Well, here's the thing. I actually don't think that the average individual can only focus on something for 30 seconds.
No, I don't think
Really,
so.
because
But for exaggeration.
Here's the thing. Like, I understand your reels or your shorts or whatever, TikToks, they're very short. They're 30 seconds or so. I understand that. Here's the thing. Someone can do that for hours. So they're focused on the broader task of scrolling and watching these short videos for hours. I would argue that the problem isn't their attention span has been so degraded. The problem is they want to fill that attention with the most dopamine, the highest dopamine hit possible.
Isn't that an attention issue though? Because they're not willing to wait long enough for the dopamine. They're not willing to wait.
Both and. I'm not a scientist. I don't have a direct answer to that.
Fair enough.
I think if I'm able to stare at a screen for 2 hours, as I have admittedly done in my past, and keep scrolling, quote unquote, mindlessly, I am choosing to focus on that thing for 2 hours.
No, because now we can get into some really fun philosophical waters. Because at what level are you? And maybe this is too loosey goosey for a podcast. Our listeners, I'm sure, can only handle so much, especially if they're going at 2 times speed. So, which I'm sure most of you are doing at this point. But at what point? Let's say that someone is, because essentially what you're doing at that level is it's somebody at the slot machines. It's somebody at the roulette wheel. Like they're stuck. They're mentally stuck at that place. To what extent does someone in that setting have control over their actions? Do you know what I mean? This is I can already tell it's a controversial button to hit.
I do want to be careful though, because you're correct. There is an aspect where these things are designed to be addictive, and they are playing on our brains in such a way that we are going to enter that loop of the dopamine, pulling the slot machine to get the hit. But, I was listening to, have you ever heard of Cody Sanchez?
Maybe.
So she's a businesswoman, buys and sells businesses, very good at what she does. She recently had on her podcast, the podcaster Rich Roll.
I've heard the name.
Rich Roll. Yeah. So he came from kind of a dark past, riddled with, for him, it was alcoholism, alcohol addiction, all kinds of problems. And he made the point that he didn't get out of that until he recognized that the problem wasn't the alcohol. The problem was that the alcohol was a solution for him.
Right.
The problem was he had some hole to fill.
Right.
So in that sense, you do have a choice of you can find any solution to your problem. And we default to finding the easiest solution. We default to opening our phone and staring at whatever it presents us with, because that is easy. Right.
Well,
so
I'd
it is an easy choice.
Toss out there. It's not even about easy. I think it's about it's the one we want, like, I think, or sinfully want, I'll say, because the Bible passage that always stands out to me with this is Psalm 115, which is a very, very impactful Psalm in my life, for its first couple of verses, but its later verses, where it talks about those who Those who make idols become like them. Those who worship them become like them. They have eyes but do not see, ears but do not hear, mouths but do not speak, noses but do not smell, hands but do not touch. And so our tendency is always to make these gods or to find these gods that we worship, and then paradoxically we become like them. We fall into the same trap. And for me, as I watch the social media frenzy, as I watch technology, these things, AI, what have you, to me, this is the modern. I mean, there's any number of ways that we can do this, but for me, this is the one that I pay the most attention to. Is technology becomes that thing. I mean, look at someone on social media. They have eyes, but they don't see. They have ears, but they don't hear. All these things.
That's an interesting way of putting that. I haven't really thought about it in that way before. Definitely the idol piece of it, but the specificity of eyes but do not see is fascinating, actually.
Yeah, and I think the same applies for me. And this is where my paranoia comes in a little bit more. Is like AI and ChatGPT. Like to me, as I watch people experiment with those things, and I'll admit I'm experimenting more with ChatGPT and trying to figure it out and trying to figure out what's a healthy relationship with it. But the way that I see it being used now, to me, feels very much like tack on to Psalm 115. They have brains but do not think. It just seems like the next logical step in that sequence. So anyway,
that makes sense. Sidebar though, with ChatGPT,
yeah,
it has solved a problem for me.
It has solved a problem for you,
and I'll tell you what that is. I don't like having a web browser on my phone.
Yeah,
for personal reasons. However, being able to look up stuff in real time, especially if I'm out and about and just need to look something up about a place I'm trying to get to or some information related to my work, whatever it is, that's very helpful. And not having that ability is, well, it's not required to have that ability. It dramatically increases the speed at which I'm able to get things done in the workplace or when out and about with the family.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. And let me be clear.
My solution was I download the ChatGPT app, ditch the browser, use the latest model of ChatGPT because it has modern search capabilities.
Yeah.
Without all the ad distractions, image distractions, etc. But I can look up very quickly, a particular type of algorithm or what time does this restaurant close, etc. And it gives it to me.
Yeah.
And it can even give quick analysis of when might be the best time to do something or what's the best way to construct a document, etc., without me having to go search the internet and compile that information myself. So it cuts out, not only is it cutting the browser off my phone, it's cutting out research time.
Yes.
So that it has solved that problem. However, I will also say I can understand how you, coming from a perspective as a creator, as a writer, there are aspects of ChatGPT that will be very different for you.
Yeah, and let me be clear. I'm not saying I don't think ChatGPT is of the devil or anything. I am hesitant to be excited about it because there are certain things that I see in my own experience as a teacher that have been very like, well, that's not good. I think as always the disadvantages are going to apply mostly to the youths and not to the old and the wise, which we're not there yet, but we'll get there.
What are you saying, Banjo? Saying I'm not old and what?
Well, despite the mustache, you're not there yet.
Ouch! Just right in the face.
Anyway, with those, I don't know if I think I spun us off topic. Did I spin us off topic?
It doesn't matter. We're after hours. We can talk about whatever we want. And the audience is along for the ride. They may not.
Yeah. Like sorry, audience. You're getting experience some whiplash here. Maybe on this topic though, I was going to ask you, what do you think it means as we're talking about these things? I'm always thinking about like, what does it mean to be countercultural? What does it mean to go against the flow? As a Christian, I have, despite my very conservative tendencies, I'm pretty anti-establishment in a lot of ways. There's a lot of institutions that I pay a lot of homage to, and there's a lot of institutions that I really fight against. and that's probably a conversation for another time. But one thing that I'm always interested in is I think there's a call for Christians to stand outside the culture, for us to not be, or not maybe outside the culture, but to be, we're sojourners. We're not, we don't belong here. This is not our home. And so I am really eager to see Christians discussing things in a way that is so different from the world as to be mind blowing. And I have put, like, there are things that I think about that I'm like, I know that nobody wants to get on board with this idea because it's so counter to the way that the world works. But this is how I feel about it. That's part of my stance with, like, this is what I think countercultural means. But I'm curious, as we are undertaking this endeavor in Forging Honor, and part of the process with that is we're saying, all right, we want to think about what it means to be Christian men. What does that mean to you to be? Do you think about being countercultural at all? Is that a something on your radar, or is that something that's more like for a different quadrant of Christian life?
No, I think it's a good question. And just to be clear, what you mean by culture is more what's broadly accepted, right? Because there are kind of subcultures, even within Christianity. There's a Christian culture. And you wouldn't want to be countercultural to a culture that espouses the views of Paul and Peter and et cetera, of Scripture.
I wouldn't.
Right?
No, not a scriptural culture. No, but to be more clear, more specific, I'm not talking about like a Christian takeover of culture, and I'm not talking about like going against the Christian culture necessarily. But what I'm talking about is, if we're Christians, that means we're going to stand out from the world in some way. We're going to look different than the world in some way.
Right.
And I guess my question is, we're doing something that in Forging Honor that in some ways looks very similar to a cultural model. It looks very similar to a self-help model of podcast.
Which I hate the term self-help, to be completely honest.
I know. But if we're thinking about what it means to be countercultural, how do you think about that term in terms of we're trying to create a culture maybe that is different from the world, and maybe it's different from quote unquote Christian culture.
Depending on what you mean by that.
Yeah, now I'm not saying biblical. I'm just saying like mainstream Christian kind of a.
So culture being what's the mainstream, what's the newest, the greatest thing. That's just kind of generally, and for our context, let's just pare it down to the American culture.
Yeah, that's about what I mean.
We can kind of speak to that. And to be countercultural, I mean, counter means against, right?
Sure.
You're against the culture in a way. You're set against it. Like I have in my head, it's a vision of, a river, a roaring river is the culture, and you're a rock in the middle, and you're just sitting there. And the problem is, in that analogy, the rock eventually gets worn away, and there's nothing left.
You got to go one better. You got to be the salmon. You got to be going upstream.
There you go. You could be the salmon going upstream. My point is, the culture's all around us. It's hard to define.
Well, the joke about the two fish, right?
No.
There's two fish that are swimming along. I'm taking this from David Foster Wallace, by the way. I'm just going to cite my source as a good English major. But anyway, there's these two fish that are swimming along in the water, and they bump into this older and wiser fish. And the older fish says to the younger fish, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And swims away. The younger fish go on for a little while, and the one turns to the other. He goes, "What the heck is water?"
That's a good, exactly. Like you don't necessarily recognize the culture you live in, and yet you have to do that to be countercultural.
By the way, as an aside, on that topic, folks should go read David Foster Wallace's speech that he gave. This is water, which is a phenomenal unpacking of that idea that JJ just had of like the culture is all around you. What does that mean? What does it mean to think deeper about that? Right. It's a really good speech. People should go read it. Anyway, sorry, I cut you off.
So ultimately, when we talk about being countercultural, there's the question of what do we mean by that and why? And I think part of that is get back to the Christian idea of our greatest enemies are the world, the flesh, and the devil, right? When we say the world specifically, the devil, it's easy for us to say, yeah, that's evil. But when we say the world and the flesh, we don't mean it in the way the Gnostics might have meant it, or
Right.
ascetics might have used it,
Or a monastic stance.
or a monastic, right? We're not trying to abandon our earthly flesh. We're not trying to abandon all the things of this world, because even though we are called to escape sin, we are created with earthly bodies.
In
Which
the garden.
means, right, in the garden, we're created with earthly bodies, and we're commanded to work the earth. We're commanded to garden, commanded to work. And that right there at the very beginning shows the care that God had for creating us with natural bodies, even though we are also spirits in those bodies, which is a conundrum that can be hard to wrap your mind around if you haven't thought about that before. So when we say cultural, what I think of are the attacks of the world and the flesh, not the good things of the world and the flesh that we're commanded to enjoy as Christians, or the good things we reclaim as Christians, right?
So you would separate those two parts of culture.
Right, because countercultural does not mean going and living like the Amish do and separating ourselves from all technology or
Sure.
all newer literature, whatever it is, electricity, right? We use that as Christians. However, we are countercultural in the way we use those things.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe in a Presbyterian context, I drink whiskey. It's countercultural to not identify as a drinker, to not go out and get slam blasted drunk every weekend. It's countercultural to not use whiskey or beer or other alcohol to its worst possible end. If I'm out on a weekend and I get a drink, most of the people sitting there in the restaurant with me, okay, not most, I do live in the South where a lot of people have certain standards. But a lot of the people, especially if I go to a bar with my buddies, you're going to see a lot of people there that are there to get drunk.
Yeah, that's the purpose of alcohol in that culture, in that sense.
Right. So it's countercultural to enter in, have a drink or two, have a great conversation with my friends, get up and leave sober.
Yeah.
Like that. So by countercultural, I'm trying to figure out in that example, like, what does it mean there? Like, I'm not running against the things of the culture, except for the things that have been produced by the culture for certain certain horrible acts or certain, especially like sexual deviancy or whatever it is. But we do use some of those tools as essentially as the Lord intended, right?
Yeah.
So one thing I've mentioned before, that is decently well documented is so the printing press. What was the first book printed on the Gutenberg press?
Bible.
Yep. So the Bible, also the most produced piece of literature off of the Gutenberg press. Do you know what the second most produced category of literature was?
Was it French smut?
Yes, correct.
I'll take Gutenberg press for 800, please, Alex.
Yes, there you go. You got it. Point being, we had a tool, books, literature, that most Christians today say, yeah, read all you can, read awesome stuff, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But there is a whole underbelly there that has been in many ways reclaimed or moved on from by the world, to the realm of internet and video. But we didn't look at that as Christians and go, wow, we invented the printing press and now they're printing all this horrible French material, which another point against the French. So we got to shut this down. Like, we're going to get rid of printing presses. Some people thought that, but here we are several centuries later, producing excellent works of literature, amazing works of theology, wonderful fiction for us to read. That's countercultural. It's producing works of quality, producing excellence, and producing it for the building up of the faith rather than the tearing down.
So just to be a thorn in the side.
Yep, go for it.
I'm thinking, so with the press in particular, I'll go a whole hog here. I'll go just
Luddite.
Well, maybe not the whole Luddite, but like I'm gonna step on some toes, and maybe I don't really mean this, but I'm gonna say it anyway.
Okay.
I am offended by the kind of material that comes out of like Christian quote unquote art houses most of the time.
There's another thing, is it's the quality side of it.
So
like, I see this. So I'm the son of a musician.
Yeah,
Christian musician, and yet he rarely identified himself in his marketing materials or to church. I mean, he would say, "Yes, I'm a Christian. I produce Christian music," but he's not like, "I'm a Christian, therefore." I sing these songs. Like, he's not.
To this point, I have not seen a good Christian movie. Okay?
A good what?
Like Christian movie, like a movie that was marketed.
Have you seen a good movie produced by Christians?
Not that I know of.
That's fair.
Not that I can't name you one movie.
There's a place to reclaim.
Yeah, and I think it's just like, I don't know. But when I watch movies, I love movies.
Yep.
There are my favorite movies are not only not produced by Christians, they're most certainly produced, acted, directed by non-Christians. And to go further, they depict acts that are quite non-Christian. Those are my favorite. My favorite movies are.
So here's something, Banjo. Is that one? You expect the world to produce terrible content. Like, you can't. Like, they're going to do that.
Well, so here's the thing. But here's the thing, though. I wouldn't call that terrible content. I would call it depicting vile acts. But I would not. Most of it, I would call great art.
Okay, interesting.
Take The Godfather. It's a movie about criminals, terrible criminals, and one could argue it glorifies those criminals. I think it's probably the greatest movie ever made. You could throw up Citizen Kane,
okay,
but at least in terms of like you just it's The Godfather's up there, and I know I'm well. Sure. Within my bounds to like toss that up as a great movie. I love that movie. I think it's a great movie. I don't think you can like come close to making that like. Anyway, I have a problem when Christian. Or maybe put it this way. I don't think it's countercultural. It's productively countercultural to say I'm going to make Christian movies. I put that in quotes, and to have that mean there's no bad things that happen in my movies. There's no swearing that happens in my movies. There's no violence that happens in my movies. There's nothing interesting that happens in my movies.
Well, here's the thing. You are directly hitting on a question of some of those things you depict. Are they necessarily anti-Christian? Like cussing, for example.
Sure.
I do think it's a bad habit to cuss regularly, to make it part of your regular language. It's uncreative, just on a basic front.
It can be.
But I don't see in scripture a place where it says, thou shalt not use these specific words. Now, it does say, let every word.
Don't use obscene language, it says.
Right. Well, we do have that. So then there's a question of what does it mean to be obscene?
Yeah.
And I had a pastor tell me obscene literally means it's off stage, right? You don't want to see it.
Unseen. Sure.
It's unseen. It should be unseen. And I do think there is a line. Like, for me, that line is pretty much sexual content.
Yeah.
However, if we were to say, thou shalt not have bad language, you cannot depict or talk about violence, you can't talk about sexual acts, then most of the Old Testament gone.
Right.
So,
not that I think people should be making movies about the Old Testament, but that's a different story.
Sure. Well, but my point is, the Old Testament has all of this.
Oh,
now,
yeah.
Does it get into and does it talk about when David's son goes in and rapes his sister Does it talk about exactly what happened in that moment?
No, there's a particular way that it's, yeah.
It says he took her and lay with her. And we all know what that means.
It's obscene. It's off stage.
Right. But it's still, like, it has to tell the story somehow.
Right.
And so my point is, I think that a quality Christian movie doesn't have to say, we're Christians, we're going to preach the gospel, blah, blah, blah. But it does have to have certain lines of how the storytelling is going to be done.
It could be.
So, like, you see this with, like, is it Hitchcock?
Mm-hmm.
He's known for the sign on the bedroom door. Yeah. And that tells you all you need to know about what's happening behind that door.
Well, yeah, also some really clever euphemistic shots, but we won't get into that. That's in film.
He doesn't have to show it, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't have to display it shot for shot on the screen. He can tell you, for the purpose of the story, this couple interacted off scene.
Some of his violence is similarly done off scene, but that's
exactly. And I think that's where, when it comes to movies, I value those movies that can get into the nitty gritty a little bit without having to turn the camera to it.
Sure.
Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think for a lot of people, this is going to be like, that's a very personal line of like, what are you okay with? What are you comfortable with? That's going to be different for a lot of people. And I don't say this, let me clarify again. I said at the beginning, at the outset, this is like the most extreme form of my thought. I'm really left of center and of that thought, in that, like, I understand that some people are just not going to be comfortable with certain things. Like, some folks use VidAngel, and that's like that's a blessing for them. Good on you. My sentiment in that sense comes from, like, I think I'm just, as someone who loves books and movies, I'm personally disappointed in what I see. Like, I think we can do better. And to me, I think,
well, absolutely, that's a good thing you see that.
Yeah,
because
well, I hope so.
Otherwise, we're not going to have the next round of advancing in our art. If everybody thought we've hit it, we're done, we've achieved what we can do, that's it.
And to really nerd out for a second, I think that's where most people think I have a hard time in this, dare I say, postmodern age, like, knowing where art goes from here, or knowing where books and movies and television and all that goes from here, because we've reached this level of, like, meta awareness where everybody knows what a meta narrative is. Everybody knows how that functions. It's not clever anymore. And I don't know, maybe folks know. And if folks know, like, of a philosophical movement that is already advancing beyond the realm of meta narrative and postmodernism, please let me know. I would love to know what the next realm of philosophy is. But I don't see it. I don't see where we are next. And the problem with the postmodern age is, what is there to say after it? It's a philosophy that has, like, the most skeptic, most cynical, most just drain the life out of you mantra of anything. Like, you can't build anything in a postmodern age. And I am dying to know what comes next. And I really hope that Christians are at the forefront of that, like, pushing a countercultural movement that is more than just, there's an absolute truth. Like, yeah, I think we're all okay with that at this point, And also, I think the postmodernist point is well taken. Like, there's more than one way to look at a thing. That's right. Like, if you boil down postmodernism to its most useful bit, that's, like, all we're getting at. So what next? Like, I want something more, and I just don't see it.
I don't know the answer. I'm not enough of a philosopher for that. I do think, though, you're exactly right. Christianity as a whole should be at the forefront of that.
Or at least try. Give an effort.
Absolutely. Well, I do think a lot of it comes down to the Christians that have attempted to do that. As you've said, you haven't seen good Christian movies. The Christians that have attempted to do it, they're brave, and more power to them.
Yes.
For even attempting. However, there is a sense in which art as a whole, like, you still need to be a good artist. You still need to produce decent art. even if your central message is the gospel.
And those
Right.
things are measurable. It's not like there's just a subjective. It's not, art is not totally subjective.
Interesting. There's a take.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I agree with you, but like there's a take that's countercultural.
yeah. Yeah. I think I think if you look at, like, Aristotle lays out rules for drama. He says, like, if you're going to have a drama, this is what you're going to have in it. And this is going to be better than this. And I think if you play it out experimentally, you find that it's true. You know, like you there's certain rules that have to be followed.
Are they rules because someone turned them into rules, or are they rules because someone had observed them and said, here are the rules that have made for good drama?
I would say Aristotle is observational, at least in that respect. He's observing something that is true, and particularly the way that he is, what he was doing. So if folks don't know, go read Aristotle on Poetics, which was his basically essay, pamphlet, guidebook for how to judge things when it came to, like, theater competitions, which were a big thing in Greece.
Interesting. I did not know that they did theater competitions.
Oh yeah, it was like part.
That's
It was
so
like
cool.
it was like down from the Olympic Games. It was like people would write plays, and there was two levels. There was the tragedy and there was the comedy, and the tragedy was the higher art, and comedy was like a little bit lower than that. And so the goal was to write the best tragedy. And so Aristotle was a judge in one of these competitions, and he wrote a guidebook for how to write,
For
like, the
judges?
best for the judges, basically.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so he says this is what a good comedy is, and this is what a good tragedy is. Unfortunately, we've lost what his definition of a good comedy was. All we have is the tragedy. But most of what he says with tragedy is applies to the comedy. Just you kind of have to reverse it. But in any event, his rule book basically, like, this is how you know. He doesn't give like a scoring system, but he does give, like, this form of tragedy is more effective than this kind. And all of it is aimed towards catharsis, and so an emotional release as well. Also, side note, part of the reason that tragedy was like a big deal in Greece, I don't know if you know this, Aristotle thought that people should watch tragedies before they went to vote. So you should go to the theater, have a cathartic motion, clear out a cathartic movement, clear out all of your feeling and emotion, and then go vote. So it's like, have a good cry,
Interesting.
go to the polls.
It's going to make you more reasonable somehow.
Basically, like, you are going to have you're going to spend all of your emotion on this play, and then you won't have any emotion going into the voting booth.
So that gets back to your question about earlier, fiction as an escape.
Yeah.
And I do think that if it does anything for me, it allows me to put aside some of that emotion.
Yeah.
Because I can expend it on the fiction. And you're exactly right. I've never been able to identify that before, but it is an escape because I can say, well, that was this whole thing, these unreasonable things happened, whatever. That's great. I can leave that there. I can turn and be a more reasonable individual, or however you want to define that.
Interestingly, though, studies show that fiction also boosts our empathy, our ability to empathize with that other person. So simultaneously, you're able to kind of clear your thoughts a little bit by kind of like spending this emotional energy. But at the same time, because you spend so much time in another person's head and getting to know these emotions better, you actually develop more empathy for another person. So you have a better emotional response to another person. Part of why I think fiction is so important and worth spending time on, but that's a conversation for another time.
Interesting stuff. I'm not sure what conclusions, if any, we're coming to on that.
One thing I'll toss out there, and this is more for people listening, I guess, just an encouragement, I think. There's a really good book out there called Disruptive Witness by, let me check, by Alan Noble, by Dr. Alan Noble, Disruptive Witness, Speaking Truth in a Distracted Age. Really good book, really helpful book. He makes a really great point. He's talking about what does it mean to be countercultural? What does it mean to kind of live a life that stands out from the world in some ways? And he's attacking some particular issues. It's a good read. One thing he talks about is he makes the claim that Christians should be the foremost tragedians of the modern age. We should enjoy tragedy. And his argument is the thing about tragedy is when you nobody walks away going from a tragedy going, well, that was good. You know, everybody walks away from a tragedy saying that was heartbreaking, right? That was sad. It shouldn't be this way. And he says, that's great. If we're aware of that, we're aware of the fall. Like, tragedy only makes sense in a fallen world. Tragedy only makes sense in a world where there's a way it should have been. There's a way it should be.
That makes sense. That's interesting.
And so he says Christians should go write tragedies. They should go enjoy tragedies because and they should like encourage others to think about tragedies. Because if this is the world that we're in, we shouldn't expect happy endings, and we should look at tragedy as a way of as basically a form of apologetic. It's basically saying you don't feel good watching this. You didn't think that was the way that was supposed to end. What does that tell you about who we are? What does that tell you about our expectations for humanity? And so it becomes a great way to share the gospel. It's part of why I love like really dark, kind of evil movies, is because when I walk away from them, I go, "Oh, that was terrible." Like I needed, those were evil people in that movie. They need the gospel. This is the way that the gospel was subverted in that movie. This is the good news that people need coming out of that. And when I talk about those movies, especially with non-Christians, I can say, isn't that broken? Like, isn't that messed up? And people go, this is the amazing thing. They go, yeah, like it is. And then from there, you get to have a conversation about it. Like, what does that mean? What does that tell us?
That's really cool. I've never thought of that before, but I intend to try and use that. Very practical advice coming from Banjo right there. Good job, sir.
I try to marry the two. Try to bring them together.
All right. Well, in our last few minutes, we've talked about books. We've talked about we've mentioned a few movies, but we are a podcast. I want to know, what are your favorite podcasts right now that you recommend to go listen to?
Oh, that's really funny. I'll start safe and then I'll get progressively more edgy. My very safe podcast that I recommend is the Reform Forum podcast, which is part of the kind of the OPC, the Orthodox Presbyterian Church's educational branch. It has some really helpful podcasts that they release every week discussing Reformed theology, and they will just kind of talk about different things going on, whether in the denomination particularly, or more just in the Reformed world. So they'll often discuss books that have come out recently, or they will talk about different theological ideas, controversies, or just encouragements. You can find sermons on there and some readings of some different books. I know they have a lot of Van Til material that's worth checking out, especially if you're familiar with Van Til. I think it's probably the tendency. But that's for another time. Anyway, my other two that I probably really the other one that I listen to the most often is, as a tremendous movie nerd, I'm constantly listening to things about movies. Oh, I got another one though. I'll think of that in a second. But the Rewatchables podcast put out by the Ringer Network is very enjoyable for me. They will take a movie that falls in what they call the rewatchable category, and for them, this is any movie that you walk into and you're like, oh, that scene is on, I'm going to stick around until they get to this part. It's particularly for like the cable generation, when you were like would be flipping through channels and you would find a movie and you're like, oh, that scene is coming up.
I haven't done that in so long.
I know.
I used to do that when we were staying in hotels for track meets, but
yeah,
that's the last time I did that. But yes, great stuff. So
it's kind of a lost art. So anyway, they break down every movie, and they have some very funny. They break it up into categories, which are very funny. They'll talk about like the overacting award, or they have an award called the Dion Waiters Award, which is the actor who did the most with the least. So which actor like showed up with like 2 minutes of screen time, but totally stole the show. So I get a big kick out of that. The other one that I think is really worth listening to is Revisionist History, particularly early seasons. If you go back and listen to early seasons, right. Revisionist History. Malcolm Gladwell put that out. Folks are probably familiar with it. It's been around for a while. But just I think that there's nobody better right now at observing the weirdness of the world than Malcolm Gladwell. And especially when he's just like observing something. He just does a great job of kind of pointing the lens at something and making you think about it and say, like, why is it that way? And he's just kind of great for adding a layer of depth that you might not have had previously. His books are really great too, as well. I recommend checking a lot of those out. So anyway, those are my three: Reform Forum, The Rewatchables, and Revisionist History. That's a pretty good summary of Ben Jones right there as well.
That's a solid set. I have listened, of those three, I've listened to the early seasons of Revisionist History and enjoyed them. That was great. For me, I would say kind of the safe, you had the safe one, or more the theological one. I've really enjoyed Kevin DeYoung's podcast, Life, Books, and Everything, which is what it sounds like, Life, Books, and Everything. He will often interview the author of a new book, usually a theological work or a work of history relating to Christendom in some form. Really enjoy that. I also enjoy his sermons. So if you go find the Christ Covenant sermon podcast feed, great stuff. Also, shameless plug for my church. I listen to their sermons, the Parish Presbyterian podcast, or Parish Presbyterian Church, mouthful. You can find that one. Really enjoy. I think those sermons are great. I think folks should listen to them. So Life, Books, and Everything, a couple of sermon podcasts. I've really enjoyed recently the Ask Pastor John podcast, which is John Piper's. It's like 15-minute and like Q&A with John Piper. Great stuff. Those are kind of the theological things I'm listening to. As far as the more just what I really get into, I still listen to Art of Manliness a lot. Love that stuff.
Just had their 1000th episode.
They did. So go check that out if you haven't already. And then recently, I've really enjoyed Cal Newport's Deep Questions. You should definitely, if you haven't, if you do any form of work that could be categorized as knowledge work or creative work, hugely helpful. He does a phenomenal job of understanding the forever quandary of knowledge / creative work, which is you are being paid to produce something. You are being paid for your output in some way. However, creativity, knowledge work, it takes time. It does take actual effort. So how do you blend the two well enough, right? Because a lot of people try to apply measurement standards that are coming from like the days of factory work to modern knowledge work. So many emails in a day, so many words written, etc. Right. So he does a really good job of understanding, here's the pressure that's coming from your boss, your employer, or yourself. Maybe you have a publisher, whatever it is. And also responding with, here are practical solutions, ways that you can cultivate the deep life, as he puts it, ways that you can really dig into the work that you have to do and set aside the time that you need to have in order to write that next draft or to produce the next line of code, whatever it is. So I really find that helpful for me because I live in a knowledge work environment. So I really am enjoying, I've said Art of Manliness, Cal Newport. I've gotten into Cody Sanchez recently. I mentioned her already this episode. She's a businesswoman, and she does a great job. She interviews other business people, and just hugely informative for, how do I grow the projects I'm working on? That's what she's about, is growth.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been getting into. I should find something more fun, like the Rewatchables or something. That would be a good escape. I don't know, but maybe fiction's doing it for me right now. So
hey, fiction's good. It's a good place to do it. But well, this has been, I've enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully our listeners have enjoyed this conversation. We'll probably be trying it again. Let us know how it goes. Let us know what you think, listener. We want feedback. This is not a one-way street. We need your input.
Give us feedback for sure. One of our visions with the After Hours is we'll get to use it as an opportunity at some point with some of the folks we interview, learn more about them, just about life, and get some good advice.
Here's some of their stories.
So we're looking forward to this. Very good. Thanks for this conversation, Banjo.
We'll see you next time. This has been the Forging Honor podcast. Music and production is by Elliot George. For more information about what we do or to learn how to get involved, visit our website at forginghonor.com.
If you enjoyed the show, make sure to like, subscribe, and give us a rating to bring others into the Forging Honor journey. On our website, you'll find information about our Patreon, articles, as well as links to the many resources we mentioned in the show.
Thanks for taking the time with us today. We hope you'll take up the work alongside us and join us in the task of Forging Honor. We'll see you next time.